I always say a CAD file or a rendering is a statement.
Yeah.
A sketch is a conversation.
Yeah.
Because what you see and I see are different, and
Yep.
then we talk through that.
Yeah.
Which is really beautiful.
Hey everybody, welcome to Shop Talk, the podcast series where we talk to designers, makers, and engineers from shop to shop. Today, we're touring Michael DiTullo's studio in Portland, Oregon. He's a world-renowned industrial designer, and he's got some really cool projects he's gonna show us today. All right, let's go on in.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey.
Great to see you. Come
How's
on
it going?
in.
All right. For a home and a shop, this is, home and a studio anyway. This is really well curated. It doesn't feel like you're walking into your house, but it's still cozy.
Yeah, I think as a young designer, I was always fascinated with people like Frank Lloyd Wright, who, their home and their creative workspace were one thing. And, I think for some people, they would be like, is it weird where you can't ever leave work? And I was like, my brain never leaves what I do anyway. Yeah. And so being able to kind of run down here and work on some things really quick and then get back to the family is just kind of the life that I want, where it's just this constant flow of creativity. Yeah. I also and maybe it's just kind of like being designers of a certain age, I like to just look at stuff. I like things to be out and off the screen. I print things out a lot. I do, whether it's 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional prints. So just having it kind of be here is kind of a part of it. And
well, it's also, it's good to be in a place where when inspiration strikes, you can come down here and kind of be in the work zone and start sketching and whatever it is you need to do.
And I'm working on such different things, from consumer electronics to architectural products to motorcycle helmets. And somehow it's like when I put the things all near each other, they start to talk and inspire each other. And I think the companies that hire me, they hire me because they want something different from their category. I always say we do iconic design for the world's best brands, and it's about kind of breaking out of the norm. And so I think these different things influencing each other is kind of what helps do that. Yeah.
And do you entertain a lot of clients here?
Sometimes, and sometimes collaborators. So we'll have different contractors on for different projects. So it's nice to have a creative space to meet and review things or work together if we need to. So
and this is a product you've told me about that I'm sure you had contractors work on with you, right? Like you must have had an acoustical engineer helping out with this.
Yes, these products were for a company called Carnegie out of New York. They have an amazing in-house team. So they have an amazing in-house production team where we can make prototypes. But also I've kind of been working with them in this space for about 5 years. And then ironically, before I was working with them, I was chief design officer of a speaker company for 5 years. So I'm almost like applying everything I learned from those acoustic engineers, but in reverse. Everything I learned to make a speaker like this sound amazing, I'm inverting to reduce sound waves in a space, which is really fun. It's really cool to kind of use that knowledge in a different way. So it's a really cool category to work on, because there's the acoustic portion of it, the technical portion. Then it's like I'm designing something that has to be attractive to architects and interior designers, but also has to be designed to be as easy to install as possible. And then, for someone that owns the space, and then finally someone that inhabits the space. So I think of it as like there's 4 customers for the product that we have to think about, and helping the client think through that, like what's the Venn diagram that's going to be the right design.
And then with something like this, there's bound to be surprises, right? Like you can do a nice G2 surface all day to figure this out. But then when you start stretching fabric over a rigid form, you're going to get things that you didn't expect. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think you might know my little covert Instagram handle is Real Designer Ship. Because for me, it's not about a cool sketch or a cool render or even a cool idea. It's about getting things into production. And so for me, I think it's always a dance between the designer, the product developer and engineer, and the production team. So I pull people into the process collaboratively as early as possible. From the initial brainstorm, if I can have salespeople and production people in that brainstorm with me, it's gonna work out better in my opinion. And then this company, Carnegie, their big innovation is this textile. So this is a sugarcane-based, bio-based textile that has amazing properties in terms of it's super cleanable, but it also reacts in an interesting way to heat. So this product, it's basically an acoustic backer with some three-dimensional fins, and then it's upholstered, and it's basically autoclaved. It's put into an oven with heat, steam, and pressure, and it sucks down to create these concavities. So I understand all the processes, and I'm making my best guess as to what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
But there's rounds of prototypes because we're like, oh, that did something a little different than we thought, or it's pulling the fins down, so we need to add internal bracing. And, and those things often lead to more utility patents or solving hard problems.
Yeah. And does the lignin make like a binder when it heats up? Or is that out of the equation by the time it gets to the textile?
It's an interesting process where they're basically like, it's sugarcane waste. They're pelletizing it, extruding it into and they're extruding those pellets into a tape.
Oh wow.
And then it almost looks like the tape from like an old school like audio cassette tape.
Yeah.
Different widths. And then they're weaving that tape together,
and dyeing it and so on.
Yeah. It's dyed at the like thread level, so it's not dyed post. And so that's where you're getting these really interesting patterns with the different dyes and things. And that in-house team, led by Heather Bush, who like really developed this innovation, is like, they're like textile scientists.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, what can I make that's gonna like make this beautiful canvas for the textile?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, how do I take another designer's work, show it off in a unique way, and then give it to an interior designer for them to make their space, their design. So it's a pretty cool process.
Yeah. So as you know, my background's in architecture, but I've dabbled in industrial design. I've designed a few products. And I remember when I first started getting into it, I had a client I was working on with an architecture project came to me and said, I've got this shoe design. Like, could you do a 3D model for me? And I'm like, oh yeah, no problem, And he gives me these nice like Illustrator drawings, like orthographic. I'm like, yeah, I can totally do this. And then like a week later with no sleep, I called him. I was like, dude, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're gonna need somebody else. And like, it's something that so many of us not knowing what goes into good industrial design miss, because it's so complex to work with something like textiles, right? Like a shoe, for example. I mean, the geometry that goes into that is so complicated, and to make it something that's comfortable and to make all these different materials work together, you have to have something that's rigid but not too rigid, and it's got to be flexible and all. And like, it's something that I'm really impressed by, like shoes in particular, which I know you've done, quite a few of.
A few hundred.
Yeah.
To literally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, and I think that footwear process taught me a lot. It taught me to be collaborative, because I started at Nike in like 2003. And when I was coming from a hard goods background where I was doing a lot of watches and consumer electronics.
You're wearing one, I think.
Yeah, wearing a Carpenter watch that I worked on.
Yeah.
And so, but the footwear design process is very collaborative, because you're working with a pattern maker. I remember once a friend who worked at Audi visited me at Nike, and he's like, I want to see the machine that makes the shoes. And I'm like, this is Nelly.
Yeah.
She makes the shoes. But we would get from a drawing, she can create a pattern. And sometimes we would take a shoe last to tape it up, and she could split that and flatten it to cut and sew the upper part. And then the bottom part, the geometry is so complex and so amorphic. From my perspective, there was no way that I could do this kind of better, faster, cheaper than somebody who does this all day.
Right.
So in these cases, I'm working with a tooling engineer who knows exactly the drafts to put in to make this thing pop out of the mold as efficiently as possible. And it looks like one part, but this is actually an EVA foam part. This is a little injection rubber part, and then a third compression rubber part here, and then more rubber pods. And so then that tooling engineer is taking a first pass at the CAD. I'm importing it into Fusion, slicing it all up and being like, oh no, more like this, like remove some over here. And then we're going back and forth, and within 48 hours, it's done. And I used that process on this motorcycle helmet for Builtwell as well, where they're like, could you do the CAD for that? And I do prefer to do the CAD if it's I can do it, but I was like, again, like, you're a tooling engineer at the factory level who's just doing CAD for helmets all day, every day. Like, I think let's have them take the first pass. I'll import it, slice it, maybe I might CAD up a few individual parts, shoot them back to him, and then boom, we got a finished product faster. Because for me, it's all about, again, getting to that shipping product.
Right. Yeah, there's this is you know, I've never really looked at a motorcycle helmet that closely before, but there's no parting line here.
There's no parting line.
Is that
painted.
it's okay? Is it, the paint's covering it up? Okay.
Yeah,
So
they're opposite.
really good mold, and then
Yes, and then a little. You can see like right in here, you can see a little bit of that. So they're
sure.
really, like,
There's got to be one there.
They're
Yeah.
machining that, you know. But there's a little bit of post finishing, and then they're painted.
Yeah, and then this one's interesting too because it's flat packed, right? Like this is all friction fit together, so you would save a ton of energy shipping this stuff, right? Like if you were to send it out, simple enough for a fabricator to put it together and put it up.
Yeah. So when you're designing an acoustic product, you kind of want a few different principles at play. You want to put enough material in the space where it's going to absorb the sound waves, and then enough geometry where it's going to, again, interrupt the sound waves. So I'm always trying to find ways to do both, increase the material and increase the geometry. So this kind of like finned construction, and this is just a small segment that could be 96 inches long for a full baffle. And you'd probably do 20 of these in a space. And then just thinking through, because sustainability is kind of a core principle of this company.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, okay, how do we take products like this? The material is already 60% recycled water bottles. How do we make it more sustainable? Well, the material itself is recyclable as long as there's no glue. So we figured out, Jeremy and I figured out a way to make these kind of mechanically locked together so that you could pull it apart at end of life. You know, this could live
Throw it in a chipper.
This could live in an architectural setting for 10 plus years, and then it could be recycled again. And then we're like, oh, once it's mechanically assembled, we could do that on site, so we could flat pack it and then reduce the carbon footprint even more by reducing the box that that's taking up in shipping.
Yeah, very cool.
So we're just trying to think through, you know, I think sometimes when companies or people think of sustainability, they're thinking of one thing, like the material.
Right.
But how do you think through every kind of step to just get every little inch more sustainable as you can?
Yeah. Can we take a tour down memory lane over here?
You know, I really am just kind of a curious person. I like to always be learning and working on different things. And I think the work kind of reflects that. So these are some homework for Hasbro. One of my old classmates from when I was at school in the 90s is a design director over there. When I went out on my own, he's like, do you want to design some Transformers? And I was like, yeah, I want to be.
Are you kidding?
I want to be a professional fifth grader. Yeah.
Who would say no to that?
These are some torch concepts for the Olympics. They asked me to develop a torch concept. That's actually a functional prototype.
Oh, no way.
One is a little burned.
Yeah. Is there like a little gas canister in there?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So didn't go to production, but it was cool to be asked. This is some work for Google. This is for an early Google TV remote. And so, yeah, I remember they were really fixated on having a QWERTY keyboard. And I had to explain to them, like, TV is not a lean in thing, it's a lean back thing.
Yeah.
And so this was in 2010, 2011, and this center button was a microphone button, and it was all about voice.
Oh, okay.
And we actually prototyped it up, and it was that, you know, it was kind of before the Apple remote before voice was really big, and I just want to search NFL. You know? I don't want to be like, you know.
Right.
But we still had to have the safety blanket of the QWERTY on the backside. So this is a little sensor that's meant for your shoes for a company called Shot Tracker. They put sensors in the ceiling of gyms in basketballs, and then every player wears a sensor on their shoe, and it does real-time stat updating. So like if this sensor and the ball sensor are close, it knows I have possession of the ball, and then I cross you, and then you have possession of the ball, it knows that you had a steal, and it updates all the stats.
Okay. Yeah.
And coaches can literally see where everybody was on the court post-game and be like, oh, you were at position. So
Yeah.
it's just totally different things, and just super fun to work on that. Yeah, this is work for a company called Icon, also out of LA. They remanufacture vintage vehicles. So
their work is so good.
old
Of
Broncos,
course, you're helping, so no surprise there.
old FJs, new chassis, new motors, sometimes electric, but so I helped them for about 10 years, just remaking all of like the plastic or stamped metal bits, typically out of, this is pieces out of aluminum, but they're typically be out of machined stainless in the final part. This was a gauge cluster, inspired by Bell and Ross watches. Yeah, and our vision was like, what would the original designer do in the 60s if he had our budget? Right.
Yeah.
So, but
that's why they look so appropriate. Like all of those projects look like exactly that. I never thought of it that way, but that's it. If the designer had unlimited budget,
But we limit ourselves to the techniques they had at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So if I could go back to this little grill over here, this was also for Icon CJ3B grill. And so all the techniques are all techniques that would have existed in the 50s when that was original, but just done it's just folded metal. And there's powder coating. They probably didn't have powder coating.
Sure,
but other than that, to me, the projects tell me what they want to be. Like you just have to listen and put your ego aside.
Right.
It's when you're trying to force something that they don't work.
Right. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. This was airplay speaker for Polk. Real mahogany top.
Ooh, look at that.
The concept on that product was like, let's not make a piece of electronics, let's make a piece of furniture and make sound.
I bought this for my brother.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Nice.
I did. Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's about when it came out.
Yeah.
And it's called the Boom Swimmer. It's a waterproof, I think it's like IPX7 speaker.
Yep. For podcasts in the shower.
So the client was just like, hey, like, these little can speakers or data is showing these little can speakers are selling that are inexpensive. And I was like, well, we can't just make another little can. Like the market is saturated. And I was on vacation and I don't know, I had saw in like a store, like something that had this little tail at like a light. And I was like, oh, like if it had a tail and you could put it on bike handles or a shower head, that would at least give it like a different reason to be. And then, ended up in Target and a bunch of places.
Yeah, very cool.
These ones, this was for the same company. These ones were in the Apple store for a little while. They had these interchangeable silicone skins.
Nice. Yeah, there's also, it's, it's easy for anybody looking at this stuff to kind of see your voice in all of it, and you definitely seem to have, you're conscious of how people are going to use these things. Like everything is ergonomic. If I could just make a judgment about it from the outside looking in, it all looks inviting and comfortable, and there's affordances that make sense, and like all of this stuff has that same kind of quality, but clearly consistent with whatever the brand is, right? Like that's kind of, it's impressive.
Thank you. I really try to shift again because I want to do different things, so I try not to have like a house style. I want to explore, and I think everything has maybe a similar like level of like optimism. There's this sense of like, hey, you can make something good. But beyond that, I think it's really like, it's about thinking about the person. This is one of my favorite products that never went to production. So this is a speaker and a battery bank. And so it's like, again, thinking of like, there's so much competition in this market, but we're putting in this big battery so it can last a long time. But what if you just need to charge your phone? And so, but what if you don't have a cable? So having a lightning, obviously this is, different time, lightning and a micro USB connector. And then you can also do this with the connectors. So you could
That's great, man.
Never made it, but it's a really cool idea. Still one of my favorites that didn't go to production.
How many great ideas are just like sitting on some industrial designer's shelf somewhere and we're all lamenting it didn't happen.
This is real tooling. So this is like, this almost made it. It happens where you're like, this is not a prototype. This is a pre-production. And it didn't make it. But this was meant to be the most expensive definitive speaker. This was going to be like a $40,000 pair of speakers. This is a scale model. But again, like what it sounds like is what it looks like. So like a machined aluminum top. This is interesting kind of leather wrap. This is way before, any of these other kind of faceted products. This was maybe 2011. But it's kind of
nobody was doing that back then.
Right on trend for today. And then it was meant to have a solid marble base, which would have been amazing to help reduce vibration.
Reduce vibration, That's why you have them in shops, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where it came from.
Yeah, and speaking of shops, I mean, let's talk a little bit about your process when it comes to prototyping, right?
Yeah.
So like, you've got these are FDM printed, obviously, but you've been using 3D printing since the machines cost $200,000 and nobody had them but the big design houses, right?
And because of that, I almost always go out of house for printing.
Yeah, just because you're used to it.
Yeah, and it's just, I think owning a printer is maintaining a printer.
Yeah, it is.
So it's really nice to just be able to send a file to someone and have them.
That comes a couple days later.
And have the right machine used.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's the right? This is a knob for an oven, and so like, what's the right machine that's going to give us the right prototype to just do some quick grip tests to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah. Well, before we get into Fusion, let's talk about the drawings. I mean, this is just it's such a critical part of a design process, and I don't think it's ever really going to go away.
I agree. I think it's unfortunate when you can see that a design tool, limited an idea. And I feel myself, that happens to me if I jump into a tool too quickly. I start finding myself being like, oh, I'll just put this fillet on there because it'll be easy. Yeah. And you don't mean to do it, but you do.
You can't help it.
We're humans. Yeah. Our brains are built for efficiency.
Exactly.
And so for me, I wanted to be able to draw anything because I wanted to be able to design anything. Yeah. And I find this is still a big part of my process. And I could tell you a few times that I've tried to shortcut it, it never goes well. I remember when I was working on that grill for Icon, I was just doing everything because it's kind of very 2D flat. I was doing everything.
Just go straight into the machine for this. Yeah.
I was doing a lot in Illustrator and like just CAD, 2D CAD. And the client was just like, didn't like it. We went through like 30 iterations. And finally, I remember one day I just like got like a pencil and some paper, like sketched out 3 things and like took a photo and sent it. And I'm like, dude, if it isn't one of these 3, I give up. And he's like, you crushed it. It's that. I was like, why did I second guess my own process? So
I think there's another thing that happens there that people don't consider as much. Like when you go to design school, when you're told to, do this by hand, trust us, this is going to keep you from limiting yourself with decisions that you make early on. Yeah. Like that's something that I think most people understand, but something a lot of people don't think about is that when you show a client something that was made in a computer, they think, finished, this is this guy's idea of what's done, like this is what this is going to be.
Yes, no.
Right. And it's yes, no. When you show them a sketch, they immediately think, oh, it could be, they can project what they want onto it, right? In a way that's not really possible when they look at something that looks polished.
I always say a CAD file or a rendering is a statement. A sketch is a conversation. Yeah. Because what you see and I see are different, and then we talk through that. Yeah. Which is really beautiful. And also you think with your hands, whether it's making a physical prototype.
That's so true.
Or a drawing with your hands. I'm drawing on my iPad a lot too, but it's still like, it's when I have the idea and I'll be drawing this idea, and as the idea is done in my head, but I'm seeing different things as the line.
You're learning as you draw.
And then I'm getting 10 more ideas. Yep. And I'm like,
absolutely.
Oh my gosh, a new piece of paper. Yeah. And it's so iterative and quick versus, when you do that in CAD, sometimes it's like, it's slower and it's more about implementation.
Yeah. Okay. So do any of these shoes exist on the shelf yet? Or are we looking at really early ideas here?
None of these exactly, because a lot of these are just kind of concepts and ideas, but you could see how that, I think footwear lends itself to working this way because it's very dynamic. And I tend to be really fascinated with products that I call single taskers. So products that do one thing. Yeah. Every shoe does the same thing. Yeah. Every chair, every watch, every piece of eyewear. Yeah, these are the categories of products where there's infinite selection. Right? A smartphone does a million things.
But there's only like 3 of them.
Yeah, and they all look the same. For the most part. Yeah. But with a shoe, it only does one thing. Yeah. But there's infinite selection, and I think it's like also getting that kind of emotion that you want to get. Just doing it by hand helps. And then I'll go from like a 3D sketch like that to some just really rough orthographic sketches that I can then bring in and kind of lay out so that that sketch is always like right there in the CAD file.
Do you have any favorites on the shelf? They're all a favorite to some degree, I'm sure. They wouldn't be here, but
it's kind of funny because they're all a favorite and they're all a least favorite. Because for me, I think as a creative person, when I look at the products on the shelf, all I see is what I learned.
Right.
In a good way.
Yeah.
But I cherish what I learned, but all I see is how I would do it different this time.
yeah.
And I always think, like, if I ever do something and I'm totally in love with it, that means I didn't learn anything and that maybe I've stopped.
Yeah.
So for me, I cherish that, like, oh, this isn't there.
Well, let's go watch you drive Fusion for a minute. I want to see under the hood, see how this is all done.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're looking at the shoe tracker.
Yeah, so this is this little tiny guy called the shot tracker. And you can see, just getting everything right in Fusion was critical, because even though it's just a box, if we look at this in the pure top view, you can see everything is kind of cresting, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually quite a bit of complex geometry.
Wow, it is complex.
Yeah, it's much more complex than you think it is. And then the other cool thing was that the client developed all the internals. So,
nice.
So when I like to, work with different clients, I like to teach my clients to be like, hey, hand me over like the real internals.
Yeah.
And so, then we were able to build the CAD around that, kind of using our best practices on material thicknesses. We're not building tooling CAD, right? Like the tooling isn't, we're not including draft, but we're showing like, okay, like there's a piece of spring steel in here that's going to help that clip stay in place, and we think it'll be about this thickness. There's going to be a light pipe that goes down to the LED.
The LED, yeah.
We're showing where we think there's this soft durometer silicone here, and showing some relief on the backside. That a prototype can be built from.
Yeah. And this really it kind of hits home the importance of having prints of things, physical artifacts, as you're working on this stuff.
That's
because you can so easily get lost in the details. You zoom so far into something, it's like you're looking at it under a microscope, and then you can kind of forget and make decisions that aren't really going to have any impact on the final product because it's so small.
That's exactly right. And so, yeah, just keeping in mind that like holding that physical thing actually does really help.
Yeah.
And then again, kind of creating these collaborative workspaces with the client where they're updating the PCB, and then we're able to integrate that back in.
Yeah.
And then work on things kind of in tandem. Like here's another fun set. This was a set of products for Victrola, for a collaborative project between Victrola and Sonos.
So cool.
And so it was a family of products, and kind of like working up, all these started as sketches, and then working up the products together, right?
Yeah.
And so this is a turntable, kind of like a bedside speaker / radio, a bigger kind of outdoor unit, or just a bigger unit, and then this is like what's called a combo unit. So there's a turntable under this cover.
Oh, okay.
And then it also, believe it or not, this also has a CD player, because
wow,
CD sales are vinyl sales are up, CD sales are up, but maybe
CDs, really?
Yeah, but maybe you might want to. This is a kind of local, physical media.
Yeah,
but
sure.
you might want to stream that media in your home.
Right.
So you might have 5 speakers. You want that vinyl, that audio from the vinyl to be streamed to, and so really cool, like audio, physical, digital, analog, digital kind of a thing going on.
Yeah, I love this motif with the sort of the radius. It's like, okay, so you've got a radius here and here, and then there's another one there. It sort of terminates with that.
Yeah.
There's like this wrap thing. It reminds me of something I can't put my finger on. Like, what was your precedent for that?
I call it, it's kind of in industrial design, sometimes we call it the taco.
Okay.
Because it's basically like this.
Yeah.
And the idea was, a lot of the classic Victrolas have a big metal knob. And so I wanted to kind of bring you back to the physical interface.
Oh, so it's really pulling you into that knob.
That's right.
Yeah.
So even though this is a digital product, this has still got a really big machined metal knob. And then the same with these bigger products, like just getting down to these.
That would feel so great, wouldn't it? Like you put the little click in it, right?
Yep. And
encoder.
Flow.
Yeah.
And then even though there's a little screen behind here, just making it feel analog, talk to you in that way. which I think is really fun. And then using, more natural materials again, where we can, to communicate. I want people to understand this is a brand with history.
Yeah, big time.
And this
Control is like an institution.
That's right. And this is a product that is meant to last a long time.
Yeah.
And, as your hands and oils and this wood is going to wear.
Yeah.
And so in selective areas, using that material.
Yep.
And then sometimes I'm using Fusion for details. So this was a watch project that was a quick project, and we were just turning over 2D elements, but the dial is very 3D. Instead of printed graphics, everything is 3-dimensional. So I was like, let me just mock this up really quick for them in Fusion for this case, so they could see exactly what I want in terms of the 12 markers being physical, and then this kind of very unique crown here.
It's very very slim, the profile for that.
Very slim crown.
Yeah.
It's actually a little bit big too. It's a slightly bigger.
Kinda, you make up for the depth with the width, right?
Yeah. And then you can see this little kind of like fingernail pull detail.
Yeah.
Because I hate when you have a watch and you can't pull the crown out.
I know.
So someone that travels a lot.
Yeah.
If I can't change the time easily, I'm not.
It looks nice if you have a smooth transition there, but like it doesn't work,
Yeah, you got to be able to at least get a fingernail under.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, challenging ourselves with some different things. So this was actually a concept for Kire that makes that PET material. But I'm like, what if we did like this crazy chair concept?
I love it.
And just, being able to show the client quickly, like, we don't make furniture. I'm like, let me just mock it up.
Yeah, look what it would look like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love learning from people. And also I think the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? So
definitely.
as you teach something, you're like, you learn it in a different way. And you can see my timeline at the bottom of the screen here. It's like filled with things that aren't working.
It's a little messy, whatever.
But that's just, it's the process. And you're like, I would do it so much cleaner next time. But this is where I had to do on this. This was a hammer, like a luxury hammer.
That's a luxury hammer.
Yeah.
Man. That is gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man.
And that's kind of the funny thing about tools is like you can just you can't stop yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
Like Christina, my wife and business partner, she knows like famous last words of like, let me just mock this up with Fusion real quick. 3 days later, you're like
still tweaking.
Yeah, this was a project for LBE Design. They're a ceramics company, like high-end ceramic pots, and like even again the brain teaser of like how do you make this in Fusion? Even though it's a pipe tool, but just how do you get the 3D sketch?
Yep.
Right. And so
because it's got to flare out, right? So it's not like you can just do it around a cylinder. It's got to be like.
So the way that I did it was I made a shape, and then I cut away the shape. I'm sure there's probably a body of it in here somewhere. And then I piped around that, and so it's just like again like kind of like. It's just kind of fun to figure out the things here, so you can see that body.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the body that I cut away.
You follow the pipe, and
then it was just easy to be like, boom, pipe tool on that. But But getting to that is what took time.
And then send that off to the CNC bender.
Yep.
Did this go into production?
This did not go to production.
Yeah. So what made you choose Fusion?
As someone that is using different kind of solid modeling, surface modeling, kind of more form tools, like it has kind of all that stuff in one spot. I don't like to kind of switch between tools because it breaks up my flow, right? And so I love that. 2, the collaborative nature of it. So I'm making shared workspaces with my clients who use Fusion, also with the contractors that I use. So like the CAD contractors I use most of the time are in Seattle. And so I can get a ding, a notification when they've saved a file. I could work on, I might be traveling. So I love that part of it. And then I know I'm a little bit of a unique case, but I love the rendering tool. It's just like you're going back and forth between digital and physical. I'm always going back and forth between the modeling space and then doing a couple quick renders to be like, how does that work out? Let me try some different materials. And I don't like switching tools. So those 3 things, having rendering kind of on board as part of the program, being a fusion of different kind of modeling techniques, and then the cloud-based collaborative nature. That's why I stick with Fusion.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you having us here, and we're really, really grateful. I think people are really going to like this.
Yeah, and thanks for coming over. It's always great to kind of share the process, and people, I'm easy to find on the internets if people want to look me up.
Yep, Michael DiTullo. Hey everyone, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all things Shop Talk. If you're ready to try Fusion for yourself, find the link in our description.